Joe. Joe looked up at the clock, and he noticed that it was 4:30 in the morning. He wrapped the silk cloth back around the book, then placed the diary into his locker, for he noticed that although John's spiritual exploits had come to an end, when he turned the page he saw that someone else had added their own entries to the diary. He flipped through the pages, and he saw that he did not have enough time to complete it tonight, so he decided that he would read it again tomorrow. As there were no cars in the car park, and he still had an hour left, and all that reading had made him a bit tired, he decided to have a little snooze until the worker of the next shift relieved him. The next thing that he knew, his relief had awakened and told him that it was his time to go home. So he took off his work overalls, got dressed in his normal non-working attire, said goodnight to his workmate, and headed off home to have some breakfast and some much-needed sleep. He got up at 5, made spaghetti bolognese for dinner that he ate while watching the news on TV, and having finished eating he had a bath, and after that he went to work to begin his next shift. The car park was empty again, so he got settled, and then he began to read the diary. Part 2. Synchronicities and Precognitions. My name is Adam, and I would like to say that we could all observe God's presence and reach a divine connection with our Creator through experiencing and utilizing our synchronicities and precognitions. I personally think that a synchronicity is God letting us know of its presence, and its personal message that generally comes attached to it usually influences one's life dramatically, or drastically changing it for the good, or for the bad, clearly showing that there is a grand plan. Basically, it is God's way of interacting with its creation. And it's how we respond to the synchronicity, or God's signposts and messages, that usually have a major influence in our life's choices and prospects. So after the euphoria of the experience has settled down, we should look into the synchronicity to discover the significance of its sign, or hidden message, and see how we can apply it to our lives. Precognitions show that there is a potential plan, which indicates that there is a creator, and that we have free will, hence a potential future indicating that it is God that creates our futures, and our free will that creates our future. Whatever our destiny holds, we must seize the day, live in the moment, take time to smell the roses, be positive, ethical, and embrace life with meditation, mindfulness, and contemplation, for it is in this way that our God-given destiny will be written by our hands. My first synchronicity was at the end of my senior school, when I had to sit the final English exam, which was one of 3 exams. The first 2 were comprehension and composition, and the final exam, that I was just about to sit to complete all 3, was English literature. Now Mrs. Thompson, our English teacher, we were told by her replacement, had not been teaching us the books from the curriculum, so Mrs. Robinson, the new teacher, had to cram the correct books that were on the reading list within a few months, and no one was prepared. When the day of the exam arrived, our teacher was off sick, and we had a replacement teacher, whose usual job was the girls' gym teacher, and it was blatantly obvious, by her attitude, that she did not want to be there. In fact, it was so obvious that it showed when she had an argument with a student for keeping us all waiting, because he had used the toilet after the bell and was late. His counter-argument was that he used the toilet when he needed to, and not before, and that happened to be after the bell had rang. I found this all quite amusing, and I began to smile. The teacher took it as insubordination, so she gave me my marching orders, and I spat some abuse under my breath at her, and then I went home. Now the synchronicity in that story was that before Mrs. Robinson, our new English teacher, was taken ill, she had been doing English literature revision, and she had forgotten to wipe the blackboard clean. So the answers to all the questions were written for all to see and copy. Ironically, because the gym teacher was sporty, and not academic, she probably did not have a clue that all the answers were written down by our English teacher, Mrs. Robinson, on the blackboard for us all to see. It makes me wonder how my life would have turned out If I have had sat that final exam of which I got a grade C, which probably would have been an A, if I got all the questions right on the English literature exam, which I would have got, unless I suddenly went blind. My second experience with synchronicities was when I was a teenager, and I had been to watch a football match where, if our team won, they would get promoted into the first division, which they now call the Premier League, and they won. I was young, euphoric, and before I knew it, after the game, I was walking down Queen's Road from the train station on my way to the beach to celebrate, as our team had never been in that position before and the whole town wanted to rejoice. When I was 2/3 down Queen's Road, a police car veered into the crowd of the joyful supporters to frighten us, and nearly ran us all over. In fact, they would have hurt quite a few of us, and it could even have been lethal, if the fans' natural flight, or fight syndrome didn't kick in. The crowd hysterically dispersed, and I found myself running down Eyre Street, and before I knew it I had a policeman who was pursuing me, although at the time I didn't know it, for I was like a headless chicken in the farmyard slaughterhouse, running blindly, not really knowing what was going on. As I approached the other side of the street, a police car screeched to a halt in front of me, blocking my path. My friend Pedro, who was just ahead of me, jumped onto the bonnet of the police car, took a couple of steps, then he jumped off of the other side, and he got away scot-free. But I wasn't that lucky, so I stopped in my tracks, and made my way back from whence I had came, and it was then that I noticed the policeman that had been chasing me before approaching me. He was about 6'6", broad and lean, and he grabbed hold of me, and then he led me to the police car, and they made fun of me by dangling a dog's lead in front of my face and saying that they were going to make me wear it, so that I could not run away anymore. However, I didn't react to their sarcasm, as they drove me to the police station and put me in a cell. After a while, a policeman entered the cell, and he took my details like my clothes, the color of my hair and size. He said to me that I had two choices. I could plead guilty or not guilty. The former, I would just get a slap on the back of the hand and cautioned, and the latter, they would throw the book at me, and I would get fined, or end up in Borstal, which was a prison for young offenders, and I chose the former, because I didn't want to go to Borstal, for I had seen the movie Scum, and I did not want to end up in that scenario. At that time, I was learning judo at a martial arts school in Kemp Town in East Brighton, when a young policeman, who was also learning judo, who had heard my tale, asked me if I was guilty, and I said that I wasn't. I was just celebrating with a few fans, and that was my only crime. He replied with that, if I was not guilty, then I should not plead guilty, and he made me think. So I changed my plea to not guilty when I got to the courtroom, and I was asked to declare my plea. I told the judge not guilty, and then an attorney began to fire strategic questions at me. One that I remember was her asking me that, if I had been walking on the road, or the pavement, when I was in Queen's Road. I thought to myself that the last thing on my mind was the road, or the pavement, for I was ecstatic, and oblivious of my surroundings. So the attorney decided for me by saying that I was walking on the road. However, when my friend Pedro, who was defending me and in the box, was asked by the attorney the question of our whereabouts, he answered with confidence that we were on the pavement, and the attorney called him a barefaced liar, be it indirectly though, as she said that I had said that we were on the road, which he adamantly and audaciously denied. Then the police had a fabricated story of that I had kicked an old lady to the ground, who was at the bus stop with her shopping at her feet on the pavement halfway up Queen's Road from whence I had came, and that they had my description, and had spotted me in the rowdy crowd. So they said that they then proceeded to arrest me before I incited a riot. When my lawyer, who was a divorce lawyer, who was referred to me by my mother, asked the policeman in the box where the victim was, He replied by saying that she had obliviously got on the bus when they were pursuing me, so they lost track of her and any potential witnesses. However, the attorney had said that I was on the road, not the pavement. So was the bus stop on the road, and not on the pavement. And as for them having my description, as I wrote above, a policeman took my details when I was in the cell, of which I stress was after the arrest. These obvious contradictions should have been a game changer, but they weren't. In fact, everybody missed those 2 points, even though they were of great importance to the case that would have proved my innocence. My lawyer said that it was a shambles, because they had made their minds up before we had even begun, and that my fate was predictable. Basically, I was judged as guilty for breach of the peace, and was fined £50, which in those days was a lot of money for a 17-year-old boy who earned £28 a week at a toy factory. The Synchronicities were 2 punk songs that were in the pop charts at the time, and they were Stranglehold by the UK Subs, and I Fought the Law by The Clash. The former was that I was at judo performing strangleholds when I met the just policeman who got me to change my plea, and the latter being found guilty, when in truth I was innocent. When I was in my 30s, I had another synchronicity, but I failed to recognize it at the time. Basically, I decided to reinvent myself and pursue an academic career, and I enrolled in an A-level philosophy evening course with the intention of following it through into university. However, because one of the teachers was frustrated with his career position, he vented his frustrations onto his pupils for not answering his questions on cue or immediately in a Monty Python kind of way. And on top of that, he was abusing his authority by hitting on the young female pupils in the class, which I pointed out to him, and he retaliated by intellectually challenging me wherever possible. And because I could answer all the questions that were presented to me, he went out of his way to be even more mentally abusive. The reason for his frustration was that he had been refused promotion, and so he retaliated by not tying his shoelaces, even though he had to walk up 2 flights of stairs to get to and from his class from the teacher's lounge. Ultimately, he turned up and replaced the teacher, at the last minute, who was monitoring the students during one of the 2 exams that I was sitting at the end of the course, so he could collect the papers as they were handed in, and he grinned like a Cheshire cat when I put my papers on the pile. And I thought at the time that it was suspicious behavior. Of course, I can only speculate that he took my paper and disposed of it, because at that time the education system were thinning the herd by manipulating the results to keep the numbers down in university. I know of this because their evil ways were exposed that year in the national news on both the TV and the papers. Coming back, because of his sarcasm and his apparent rebellion, as he refused to tie his shoelaces, because he had been denied a promotion, our personalities clashed, and he probably did steal and destroyed one of my exam papers, and I received an N when the results came in at the end of the academic year. Further, my girlfriend at the time, who also studied at the class, was told by another one of the teachers, who taught psychology at the college, who frequented her fruit and vegetable store where she worked during the day, that my answering all the questions in the classroom was suppressing the other students of their academic potential, and that I had to be stopped in my tracks, and the philosophy teacher probably thought that he was in collusion with the other teachers' desires by removing my paper. I found out later through the grapevine that the philosophy teacher had been dismissed from the college for his outlandish and unruly behavior, and the final straw was when he was found in the toilets having sex with a student. However, even though I had failed my exam, I did not let it put me off of an academic career, so I enrolled in a psychology A-level course the following year. However, I got a B16 for my first essay because the teacher said that I over-explained the question. She said that it would be good for revision, but it was too long for an essay, and because of this, and that I was interested in the workings of the mind, and not the healing of the dysfunctional mind, plus my girlfriend didn't like the class, and was pressuring me to leave. I lost my heart, and I dropped out. While I was there though, I had a conversation with the other philosophy teacher from the previous year, who had always given me A's in his mock exams. And he said that he was shocked at my exam result, after I recited to him what I actually wrote as answers to the philosophy questions, of which I still clearly remembered by heart, and he asked me for my second name, so that he could check out to see if there was any foul play. However, he had to take a few weeks off, because he had had an accident on his bicycle, and had damaged his neck, and he needed time for convalescence, and I left the college before he returned, and I never found out if he had pursued his suspicions, or if he had given up because I had left, or that his health took precedence. It was at this time when Sartre's bad faith, good faith really struck me. That we must not let our environment or others drag us down into monotonous or pointless destinies. We must rise above it and grab the bull by the horns and forge our own positive, productive destinies. It was like the priest in Sartre's book Existentialism and Humanism, who had chosen priesthood because other choices that he had pursued had turned out sour. So he took those negative outcomes as signposts and let them steer him into a positive career, which was with the church. So I decided that an academic career was not my destiny, and that I had strayed from my true path. And I went back to my origins, that was in par with the wisdom of the automatic writing and the original passion of my youth. So I gathered myself together and focused on my writing, which I now know was a synchronicity, because if I became a philosophy student, I would have strayed from my true path and spiritual destiny. Finally, I was wondering whether to keep the angel entry at the end of my entries, because I didn't feel that it belonged there. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a single white feather float down and land on our balcony, and although I knew that it came from a seagull that was probably flying overhead, I couldn't help but to see the metaphor of an angel feather. Later I told a friend of the synchronicity, who said they just changed their avatar to angel feathers and a caption that said that your angels are always excited and ready to support you, just ask. God's existence, although comprehensive, is not logically conclusive. Simply put, one questions the questions within the questions until one has a total subsidence of knowledge leading to the ultimate conclusion, which is not necessarily the answer. The tree put knowledge into one's head. Man is God. God is man. Man is God, as we came from God, evolved into humans and rediscovered God with our self-consciousness and our natural spiritual awareness. God's existence is subject to criticisms because the attainment of truth lies just beyond our logical comprehension. So with faith one can venture beyond logic, but beyond faith one can witness a very real living God, and to find God all one has to do is to prove the existence of the soul. Ellie, my loving wife, and I had an experience that goes hand in hand with synchronicity and serendipity, and also correlates with precognition, premonition and clairvoyance, or voluntary possession. Basically, a few weeks back I was channeling a spirit who claimed to be Derek Carver, who was put to death for his Protestant belief, which was contrary to the church, the Tudors and the government of his time. Then, today my wife and I reached a crossroads on the actual means in which he was killed, as I thought that he was hanged, but my wife thought that he was burnt at the stake. Now Derek had said that he was burnt to death, and I was adamant that he had been hung. And so in the end we googled it, and Derek and my wife were right, which showed that it was not I, but Derek's soul that was in me on that night, which proves the existence of a soul and in turn also God and heaven. Let us now look at my synchronicities and precognitive experiences. Synchronicities. Entry 1. In my mid-20s, I did some automatic writing that sent me on a pilgrimage to Yorkshire to find a river's source. I caught a coach to Harrogate, and then I made my way to my destination on foot, which had been given to me from a synchronicity, as I wanted to go to Yorkshire, and my mother said that Ripon was on the news that morning, which is in Yorkshire. So I bought a ticket and off I went. When I got to Ripon, I walked around with a backpack and a tent, and I lived off 3 tins of corned beef and spam when I was there. My coach went to Harrogate, and I walked to Ripon. As I entered the town, I immediately came upon the river, and I thought bingo. I followed the river in what I thought towards its source. And after a time the forest became dense and it was difficult to keep going with my tent on my back. However, I persisted until I came across an army training area, and I thought that I had best find another way to the river source, and so I backtracked to Ripon. When I got back to the road, for no apparent reason, I decided to walk in the opposite direction. I walked until early evening, and then I went to a pub to have a beer and a smoke. When I was there I seemed to meet the whole pub, and it was not overwhelming in any way whatsoever. It was the complete opposite. I felt invigorated and full of life and zest. One highlight was when I swapped brands of tobacco with a stranger. I eventually left the bar and made my way into the hills, and it was when the sun was setting that I camped beneath the trees in the middle of nowhere. I slept like a log. I only got up once, because some yobs in a car pulled up next to my tent, and I went out to either greet them or chase them away, and they sped off when I got out of the tent and walked towards them, which was cool as I didn't need a physical confrontation. The next morning I was up at the crack of dawn, and I ate a tin of spam, and then I continued on my spiritual journey. After a time in the mid-afternoon, I met a partially blind man picking up pebbles on his land, and we had a chat, and I offered to help him, of which he gladly accepted. We worked until dusk, and he offered me a dinner and a bed for the night, but I gratefully refused, saying that I was fasting, and was on a journey to find the river's source, and that I had to sleep in my tent. He understood, and so we parted company as I ventured off into the night. I slept beneath the trees in Crow Wood, on Badger Mound, and I discovered how they were named as I encountered both before I have left. The next morning I got up at the crack of dawn, and I walked until I found a disused house in the middle of nowhere, went inside, and I ate a tin of corned beef for breakfast. I remember thinking that the house was ominous in some way, and I had a vision of people devil worshipping. On reflection, I think that it could have been a trapped spirit caught between this world and the next, and that I had picked it up spiritually. I sat and meditated for good vibrations, and I found inner peace, and as I left I found myself singing Pink Floyd's song, Mother, to some sheep. As the afternoon came I found a church-cum-cafe. I went inside, and had a cup of tea and a few biscuits, and I put some money in a donation pot on my way out. Later that day, I had to change direction, because of a savage dog that didn't want me to pass by on the road I was walking. I didn't want to hurt the dog, and there was no way of avoiding a physical confrontation, so I changed my direction, rearing to the right. After a time, I saw a river at the right of me just off the road, and I saw that it split into 2 directions, and I drew it on my pad, and I wrote some philosophy that our choices and actions bring change and growth. After putting the pen and pad away, I ventured upwards into the hills. As the sun was setting I felt like I was on top of the world, and my vision was panoramic. Basically, I had a 360-degree view, and I really loved it. After a short walk, I heard a noise in the distance, and a goat just casually strolled by without a care. It was nearly nightfall when I saw a rabbit with myxomatosis, and I really felt for its pain and suffering, but I could not bring myself to end its misery by me performing euthanasia. I followed it through a fence, and then I found the source of the sound, which was ironically also the source of the original river in Ripon that I had originally sought. After a bit of meditation and contemplation, I did some automatic writing on life's karmic journey, beginning from the source to the sea, which was an allegory for our soul's journey. Eventually, I got my map out, and I saw that it was the river Latha, and as I had suspected, it was the river from my mum's synchronicity. It was then that my leg, just below my right knee, began to give me some pain, and I was finding it difficult to stand, let alone walk. With this, I concluded that my time was now over, for I had found the source of the river, so I went back to the bus station to set out for home. I walked to Harrogate via Ripon, and camped the night in the park. The journey was arduous as the pain was unbearable, and I had to keep stopping so I could stop and sit down to ease the suffering and pain. The next day I was up again at the crack of dawn, and I made my way to the coach station, and when I was there, a man, he said that he was a Christian, who was sweeping, came over to me and he gave me £1. I told him that I didn't need it, as my ticket had been prepaid, but he insisted, so I thanked him and I took the coin just to be polite. When I went to get on the coach, they told me that I had to pay 50 pence more, and without that quid that the Christian had given me, I would not have been able to afford it, and I would have been stranded hundreds of miles from my home, because apart from the £1 of which I was given, I was absolutely penniless. It felt great to rest on the coach, as I needed to recuperate from my 3-day spiritual adventure, and I changed coaches when I got to London, and I was glad to be back home when I got back to Brighton. It was then that the writing had written that I was to go on a pilgrimage westward down the South Downs way from Brighton to Winchester. However, I was in no fit condition to comply, and so I went home for some healing. The next week, I read a newspaper article that wrote that in the week there had been several UFO sightings over the South Downs way, and I knew that I should have gone on the aforementioned pilgrimage. Entry 2. I was supposed to go to my wife, Ella's parents this Sunday. We go every Sunday as a rule, but it was the last of the football games of the season, and the playoffs second leg, to get our local team through to the next round that could take them into the Premier League, was still on. They do not follow it, so they would not have had the television on the channel that I wanted. I also could watch Match of the Day too, which was great, because as I say, it was the last show of the season, and this year the champions of the Premier League had gone right down to the wire, and all the football games were being played on Sunday, and not Saturday, as they usually are with the rest of the season. I was ambivalent about not going to my in-laws' house this Sunday, because I did not want to let them down, and then as if by magic on Sunday her mum phoned to say that she could not make it this week, because she had to prepare her Spanish classes for Monday afternoon. She would generally do it on Monday morning, but she could not, as she had other more important things to do that could only be done that day, because the stores were shut on Sunday. Entry 3. Yesterday, I was up the town getting Ella's iPhone's internet connected, when she gave me £10 to buy a DVD from HMV, after we were done, to show her appreciation for my help. Now, last year I had searched high and low trying to get a live gig of the Rolling Stones on DVD, but to no avail. After a lot of trouble, I ended up with a gig that said it was a live concert in Hyde Park in 1968. But it turned out to be a documentary, and bits of a gig. So I ended up taking it back, and swapping it for another one, which I thought was a live performance, and as it happens that was a documentary too. I kept the replacement, which was Get Your Ya-Ya's Out, because I could not be bothered to take it back. But I still wanted a Rolling Stones DVD live gig, so I searched on Amazon on the internet, and I could not find one. I have a vast collection of live gigs on DVDs, and I thought that the Rolling Stones would be an asset to my collection, but I eventually gave up and moved on. Then, yesterday, when I was downtown, I went into HMV, and in the shop there was a new Rolling Stones DVD called Sweet Summer Sun Live, on display in their music section. I picked up the DVD, and it said that it was live in Hyde Park, and it was commemorating 50 years of the Rolling Stones. On the back cover it had a list of the songs that they played, it had all the classics and more. I was elated, as it only cost £14.99, so I added a £5 to the £10 that Ella gave me and I bought it. Entry 4. I now have a few synchronicities that are grouped together. Today we went to the dentist only to find that they had cancelled our appointment, because they could not reach us by phone to confirm it. So we booked a new appointment for 6 months' time, and split the £40 dental bill down the middle and went on a chaotic spending spree. On the way to the mall I noticed a man, who looked from a distance identical to a friend of the family, and I nearly waved, until I realized I was mistaken, and was thankful that I didn't embarrass myself waving. We carried on our journey, and I eventually bought a live Coldplay DVD for £14.99 from HMV, and it was a bargain. Funny enough, my friend Lenny had asked me if I liked the band just the day before, and I said no, but the truth of the matter was that I had not heard them. However, because I was looking for another live band to go in my DVD music collection, and Lenny had said they were good, he even told me his favorite song, which is called Viva la Vida, and it was on the DVD. So I decided to expand my horizons and I went on to buy it. Afterwards we went from shop to shop buying Elena's stuff, which were headbands, nail polish and DVDs with films on them from Poundland. When we got back to our side of the city in London Road, we spontaneously bumped into Simon, who was the aforesaid family friend. We had a little chat, and we said that we had not seen each other for a while because all three of us had a lot going on to distract us, and we agreed that we should all get together for a few drinks in a few months. Next, we carried on towards our home, when we bumped into a friend of my niece called Kim. Now, it was only the day before that we had thought that we had seen her in the exact same place at a similar time, but it was not her. Again, just a look-alike. Coincidence? I think not. The other week it was Ella's 32nd birthday, and Lenny bought her a DVD film called The Time Traveler's Wife, and a few days later the name of the author to the book was one of the questions that were on a quiz program that we were watching. What makes this strange is that that film is an old one and the book was even earlier. Last, but not least, we had ordered a lot of Jackie Newcomb books from the internet, as we had run out of books to read, because we already had all the spiritual books that were currently on sale in the local bookstores. I still had some money left, so I reordered Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach to round off the order. About 1.5 weeks later our bank gave us some money back, and we took it that they could not get hold of the final book. So we took the money out of the bank and spent it. However, before we went to check the money in the bank again, because we had that intuitive feeling, we were watching another quiz program, and Jonathan Livingston Seagull was one of the questions on the show, and I thought that it was confirming that the book was out of stock, so we would be all right. Then when we went to check the money in the bank, we were £4.99 in debt, because they had acquired a copy of the book at last, and they had taken the money out of my bank to pay for it, which the bank had paid. This was on a Friday, and the transaction was on Tuesday, so Ella phoned up her mother to lend us the money to lessen the day-by-day fine that you get if you go into the red with an unarranged overdraft. We said that we would pay her back on Monday when we got paid. When Monday came, while Ella was putting more money into the bank, she casually asked the cashier how much the fine would be, because the money had been taken out of the bank 3 days before we noticed. The cashier then told her that if it was under £10 they do not fine or charge you for the mistake. However, things were changing and soon they will be fining you for going over the limit even if it is below £10. So it seems that gut feeling was also a premonition. Entry 5. Last night, we had our friend Nick visit, and we were trying to watch The Who live at the 1970s Isle of Wight Music Festival on our TV. Arguably their best ever performance, and he would not stop talking. Now, it is fine if he talks, but he was, as per usual, talking gibberish. He was blurting out that 2 + 2 could only be found in maths. And then Elena pointed to the screen, as the camera was scanning the crowd on the DVD. And the audience were doing the peace sign with their fingers that were 2 fingers on 2 hands raised in the air. So in effect it was 2 + 2 with their gesture, and that it had nothing to do with maths, which we took that even God was telling us that Nick was just having a bout of Gerd Jeff's outer chattering. Entry 6. Ella and I are occasional smokers. We know that it is bad for us, but we indulge in tobacco from time to time. Now, the other week we had 3 pouches in a row, and we got slightly addicted, but unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you look at it, we ran out of money. So we had no choice but to give up, or at least give it a rest until we got paid. Then, our friend Robert, who had been on holiday to Tunisia, brought us back a hookah pipe and some smoking tobacco soaked in rose water as a present, so we took it as a sign that we were able to smoke once again. We smoked all evening, and it felt good. Then after we had watched a film on DVD, we were in the mood to have a smoke, and we were saying that we should give up after this pouch, because it was not good for us, and I suggested that we should keep the hookah as an ornament. Afterwards, when I began to randomly flip through the TV channels to see what program caught our attention, on the second flip, we went from BBC 1, Graham Norton, to BBC 2, where we got riveted, because the program was about the ill health that one can get when one smokes. It was called Burning Desire, the seduction of smoking, which we took as an ultimate synchronicity, sign, or a message from Spirit, or God to quit smoking. So we decided to give up while we still have our health. Entry 7. When we were out today collecting the food for Nick's birthday meal, which I am cooking for him, together with throwing him a small party, we by chance popped into the pound shop to get a film for the evening. They sell replay refurbished DVDs there for £1, and we often pick them up rather than buy them new, be it for the good of the planet and our pockets. When we were looking through the movies, we saw an Elton John DVD on the top shelf. There was only one in the store. So I looked at it, and once satisfied, I bought it. It was a synchronicity, because just the other day, I wanted to buy one of his live DVDs for my music collection. Then, later in the week, I was up HMV looking at a DVD of Elton John that was on sale in their music DVD section, but unfortunately there were no songs on the DVD that I recognized, so I did not buy it. However, I was disappointed, for I really like some of his songs. Then today Shazam! I recognized and loved 80% of the songs on the DVD, and to say that I was totally overwhelmed, or ecstatic, is not an understatement. Synchronicities rule, ask and you shall receive. Entry 8. I have been utilizing my premonition and intuition of late by placing bets on my gut feelings, which come to me when watching the football live on TV, and I have had results with my extrasensory predictions. On Tuesday, I predicted Chelsea FC would beat Villarreal in this year's Super Cup final, but I had an intuition not to place a bet on it too. The match ended up with Chelsea winning on penalties. So if I had placed a bet on the game, the bet would have been declared void, or no good, as Chelsea won the game after extra time on penalties, and not 90 minutes, and so this being the case, I wouldn't have got any winnings. Then, today Brighton and Hove Albion were playing Burnley away, and they were losing by 1-0 at half-time, and Burnley was totally dominating the game. Suddenly, I got a strong distinct feeling that Brighton would turn it around in the second half, and that they would actually go on to win the match. I told Ella to place a bet, but she wasn't over-enthusiastic about doing it, so we didn't. At the end of the game, Brighton did turn it around, and they ended up winning the match by beating Burnley by 2-1, bagging themselves their first 3 points of the season. Entry 9. This is the last couple, just to show you why I disagree with Nietzsche when he said God is dead, or Sartre when he mouthed God had abandoned us, or Dawkins, who says that God is a delusion, for I believe that God is alive, and shows his presence through our synchronicities. Ella and I decided to walk around the park to exercise, and take in the scenery, and after we had done a lap, instead of coming back to the flat, she said that she would go to the shops direct to get some food shopping. As we walked, I found a shiny screw on the path. It probably dropped off a pram or bike, and I said that we could fix her broken shopping trolley, as it only needed a screw on the handle to be totally fixed or mended. Then, on the other side of the park coming back, I found another screw. It was slightly different, but had potential if the first screw didn't fit. When we had returned to our road, I said that perhaps the message was to try out the screws upstairs to see if we could repair the trolley, so she could carry the shopping home in it. She declined because she said that she wouldn't need it, as she was only picking up a few things in town. Ironically, on her way back, she was struggling to carry the shopping, as she had bought more than she had anticipated, and it was proving difficult because of its weight, and she thought, if only I had listened to the synchronicity, I would have had my trolley. Then, we had another synchronicity with my niece Alice on Messenger. I had been sending her some old poems that I had written, and some literature on synchronicities giving proof of God's existence through its presence. And on the text there was a poem that I wrote for my friend when she was at school some years back, who needed a poem for her English literature exam, and she wasn't into writing poetry. So she asked me if I would help, and I obliged. Coming back to the present, when my wife was struggling up the road, I phoned her up just after I had sent Alice the text, and I was telling her all about it while she was window shopping, or taking a short rest break on her way back home, because carrying the shopping was arduous. Then suddenly in the shop, she saw a GCSE poetry exercise book, which correlated with the context of my text of my friend's GCSE or her O-level exam, that I wrote to my niece along with my synchronistic experiences, showing not only that God exists, but also that it is alive, and it has a wicked sense of humor. On Monday, when we get paid, we will see if the poetry book is still there, and if it is, we will buy it, as it will prove useful, for I am writing a poetry book, and I think that was the message that was within the synchronicities.